Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the Groundbreaking Space Show. With me is Sam. Hi, Sam.
Hey,
Hi, Sam. How's it going?
good. How are you?
Good. I'm glad to have you here. And then
Glad to be
joining us today on Groundbreaking Space is Micah Godbolt.
How's it going?
Going
Thanks for
great.
having me.
Hey, thanks for being here today. Yeah, so we've been away for a while,
here.
so but we decided to dream it up all over again and go through YouTube as our and do it live pretty much. So yeah, so thanks for Micah for being our first guinea pig on
Mm-hmm.
a Big Space Show.
Happy to be a guinea pig. I know all about the joys of live live podcasts and the foibles that come with it.
Right. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, first thing I want to do is just ask you, like we ask everyone this, how did you get involved with web technology? How'd you get started, and what was the path that led you here?
It's definitely a very long path. I'll see if I can do the short version. Actually, I started with a degree in audio production. Found myself in Nashville and kind of got the bug and decided to stick around and get a degree there. Quickly to find out there really aren't many jobs in audio production unless you want to go to New York or LA, and I really didn't have a huge desire to do either of those. So I took some of that musical background and some of that computer background and actually found a job at a Mac store. It was a branded one, just a local Mac store that happened to sell a lot of audio gear and that kind of stuff, and it was just an opportunity to get into computers. From there, did some other stuff with computers, got a little more versed in that, find myself in a print shop around 2005. I have to get numbers on that, but mid-2000s. And I was making copies. But my background in computers, my background in a little bit of graphic design, got me into being able to do that and work there at the print shop. 2007 hit, and economy, tanked. And the first thing people stop doing when the economy goes down, they stop buying, letterhead and stop buying the business cards, like all those non-essentials, which is usually ironic because those are things. Advertising is like the thing that you need when the business is starting to get down. But we found ourselves in a place where we needed a new revenue stream. We needed to figure out like what else can we do to make money in this crappy economy. And we decided, well, we've got all these like all these construction workers and lawn care people, like a lot of blue collar people that we did work for. None of them have websites. And this is 2007 when everyone was starting to get a website, and we decided we'll jump in on that bandwagon. So lo and behold, I was a guy that knew how to use computers, so I was the one put kind of in charge, kind of helped spearhead that whole thing. We actually started out with a small local like ASP-based CMS that was really just kind of a bit of a mess. It was like all table-based and just old school. We did that. We built probably maybe 30 sites on this thing. It's one of those where building lots of 5-page brochure sites. But we got to a point where like making even the most minor change took forever, and it cost our clients a ton of money, and we didn't see much of it at all. So we felt confident or cocky or whatever you want to call it, and we're like, well, why don't we just build their websites? And did some research, found a small CMS that worked great for the kind of sites we're doing. And basically over a process of 3 months, this was kind of like my trial by fire, I took 30 websites in this other CMS and basically ported them over to a different CMS. So yanking out all the styles, basically recreating all these pages over and over and over and over again. Because we didn't use their templates, we didn't use their markup or anything because it was pretty horrible. So basically, I had all of these like 30 really basic designs that I had to build as a website. And that was really it. I mean, you do that for 30 of them, and you're relatively competent. I had taken a couple small classes at the local college where I was at, just kind of to get some basics. But for the most part, just a lot of self-taught, a lot of ripping apart. I think Web Designer Wall or something. It was a blog. I remember seeing it. I loved the layout, and I poured over that source code. This was back like when Firebug was like, what? What's Firebug? Poured over the source code, trying to figure out how they stuck a sticky footer background at the bottom or something like that. And I just remember spending so much time just like trying to like ingest all that code. So anyway, that led to getting married and moving down to the Portland area, in which I was able to get like my first actual like industry job here at a local shop, and kind of from there went from that to a couple other positions to where I'm at now, and really it's been like 5 years or something since I started this whole trek, and it's been a whirlwind. I mean, as I'm sure we'll talk about, I've gone from making copies and a couple websites to I'm kind of wondering what I should do next, because I'm just about at a point where I've done everything. So that kind of brings us up. It's just a ton of self-learning, a lot of reading over blogs and following Twitter, and just digging into everything I could and questioning everything I could and trying to build the best code I possibly could.
What were the two CMSs?
The 2CMS, God, I don't even know if it had a name. It was a small company back in my hometown of Bellingham, that it was just like their homebrewed kind of thing. It's completely proprietary. So, if we wanted like the smallest change to a template being made, it's $150, to like change one minor thing in the template. They showed us we had access to a field in the header where usually the Google Analytics go, and they're like, well, you can throw a style tag up there, and you can use CSS to modify the page, and that was mind blowing to me. I was like, I can make changes to the page. It's incredible. So yeah, we quickly realized that like it was holding us back, not being able to quickly make those edits at an affordable rate. So I did some real basic searching, and I came across one called CMS Made Simple, which is still flourishing. It's just a nice small, really great for like brochure sites, 10, 15 pages. It has some basic content types, but really just great for whipping up some templates. It's pretty much all stored on the server in the database. So just real simple, easy to get into. It also introduced me to it's PHP based, but introduced me to the Smarty templating language. So that was my first introduction to like a for loop or an if loop, and variables and those kind of things. And I amazed my boss when I was like, oh yeah, we take this template and you modify it. Like I found myself going out and finding like a carousel or something, grab the mark of the carousel, drop it in, and start throwing Smarty loops at it. And I found myself realizing that I could take images inside the gallery of the CMS and actually spit them into a carousel or an image gallery of these other third-party jQuery plugins. I'm like, just kind of reverse engineering and hacking lots of things. So it was a lot of playing with the code, trying to figure out like how can I loop through these things and inject variables, and really was my trial by fire of just learning the basic tenets of programming, which of course led really well into more PHP and into Sass and those kind of things. It's amazing that the programming stuff led into Sass, but yeah, it definitely helped me as I got into that and started dealing with all of the things that Sass can do.
So I want to step just a little bit back before the web stuff, but
sure.
When you do audio production, what does that mean? What were you doing with audio production, and what tools were you using? I just want to get an idea of that background and how well versed you were in that. And
yeah, it's Nashville, so everyone went out there. It was crazy the amount of people coming to this program. It was quite a popular program. It was basically a bunch of rock stars showing up at college saying, I'm going to make it big, but just in case I don't, I'll get a degree in audio production, so I've got something to fall back on. It was like 95% of the class. It was kind of fun, but it was a full degree. It was like a full bachelor's I got there, bachelor's of science, bachelor's of arts, one of the two, BS I think, and. But it was the whole gamut. It was everything you needed basically to get started in Nashville or New York or LA or something. So we talked about artist management, we talked about copyright law, we talked about just the music history in general, and then for the technical course, it was getting in and using Pro Tools, using MIDI, mixing techniques, surround mixing techniques, studio techniques, mics, and those kind of things. So learning how to go into a live mixing environment, use large format consoles, use different microphones. This is actually a microphone I bought back in those days to do recording, and it's still around and it still works, which is exciting. But I think kind of the interesting part that came out of that, though, was one of the first things that you learn in audio production is troubleshooting, because inevitably when you're trying to make something work, something's going to go wrong. And in audio production, audio always starts at a microphone and it ends up in a recording medium. And the process it takes to get from one to the other can be extremely complex, extremely convoluted, going through preamps and going through DI boxes and going through cables into routing patch bays and into mixers and so on and so forth. So one of the first things you learn is how to troubleshoot when you have a problem. And it was always interesting. You have to understand the flow of audio from the microphone to the tape to be able to do that properly. To know, like, well, I'm getting lights here, but I'm not getting lights over here. So understanding the space between those, I can now troubleshoot that, there might be a problem with these three things, and you can go to those and figure that out. And I think that was really one of the biggest keys that I've taken with me from that education into web development, because it's very much the same thing. Like I don't like magic boxes in the web. I don't like something that, well, you just fill out these variables and everything works for you. It's wonderful. So not a huge framework fan. I really want to. I would rather build something on my own, and I've done this, build something on my own and then realize, oh, I just built what that other person did. Okay, well, now that I've at least built it, I realize how good theirs is. Now I'll go ahead and use theirs. I basically did that with Pattern Lab recently, where I found myself like, I don't want to just jump into this magic box of Pattern Lab. So I was taking stuff and building something, and I finally got to a point after solving a bunch of problems where someone said to me, you just built Pattern Lab, right? And I'm like, yeah, I did. But now I can see the value of what that brings to the table and the problems that it solved, and why it solved the problems in the way that it did. So, there's a lot of value in that education and learning how to troubleshoot and learning how to find where something broke.
Right. I mean, it's really with we do Environments for Humans. We do a lot of online conferences, and so the first year to 2 years, I was just like trying to figure out what the basics of audio production were. I had like no background in it whatsoever, and just trying to get decent audio into an online summit was just an online conference was just this nightmare scenario. I was totally out of my depth trying to figure everything out.
Well, I am available for consulting, and my rates are pretty. So we should talk.
Yeah, definitely. We should talk. Definitely. I think it's light years better than what it was when we first started out. So, but yeah, cool. So like troubleshooting is a hallmark of just our industry, and I always remember Chris Coyer's In Control saying like how we build things on the web, and it's like 4 things, and they're Google is when we're trying to figure out how to build things. Is just we always trying to go out and search things, and then we also because no one knows everything, and just trying to figure out how we build it. But I definitely I feel I love how you had to build like the 30 websites and pour them back into the CMS. That's some awesome learning experience.
Yeah, it's that whole muscle thing of just going through those repetitive motions of, okay, here's the layout, here's my images, here's the styles. How do I quickly get that over into I basically had a bunch of designs I just got to build over and over again for clients that had needs and demands and whatnot, and it was it was exactly what I needed to get started on that. Yeah. But as far as the Googling, I 100% agree. My fun story is that I talk to my wife about the things I do in work and problems I come across or something like that, and she still, I don't know if she 100% believes yet that half my job is Googling things and doing the right things to Google. And whenever I dive into something that I don't know, she's like, well, you don't know anything about that. I'm like, I know how to Google it. I know how to find it. I know how to finally figure it out. And that's really what it comes down to. Like, if you ask me to dive into SVGs right now, I haven't done a lot, but I can Google it. I can find it. I can find examples and break them apart and recreate it. And if my job came to me and asked me to do much with SVGs, but like, okay, sure, no problem. I mean, it's out there and I can figure it out.
Right.
I feel like the self-taught is such a like rite of passage with with any of this stuff, whether it's some audio production stuff or SAS or pattern labs. But like even with my class this week, they've been going through a lot of SAS stuff, and it's like sure I could give them foundation or a pre-existing grid system, but once they've built one on their own and they've actually used variables and mixins, they're like, oh, that's how that was put together, and I can do this on my own. And now they don't even want to look at the other ones. But the self-taught part is like a badge of honor that I think that I like having.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a good comparison because, like, I like it's that as a kid, you always hated homework, but then you realize that it's the repetition and doing it over and over again. That's when it sinks in a lot. So I feel like, you like, because do you do a lot of like with your students, Sam? Do you have to do a lot of like homework with your students, or is it a lot of do you think that's where the magic happens with students, or is it a lot of the in-class stuff that's where like students really grok it most?
I think it's really more by doing, because they need to like go through. I have SAS is on my head this week a lot because we're in week 4 and they're doing a lot of SAS right now and building their own grid systems, and they love mixins and variables. But it's one thing to just say like, oh, this is what a mixin does or this is what a variable does. But when you see their mind click and they're saying like, one of them asked me like, can you put a mixin in a mixin? I was like, wait, let me think about that, because I actually haven't tried that or thought about this. And then they get it to work, and then they're like, oh my gosh, like this is too much power.
No one
but then they
person
find
should build this
an
much
awesome
power.
way to use it. Yeah.
Well, and then that's a good way to introduce like that. You do the SAS Bytes podcast, right?
That is correct.
So how did that come about? What can you describe what it is? And
Sure. SAS Bytes is your weekly bite of SAS during your lunch break. Every Thursday, 12 p.m. Pacific, or around there, depending on the week. The way it started, it's been great because I'm 69 episodes in, so it's been going for a while, and I've only missed a few. So I've been at it a good year and a half. And the way it started was I used to work from home. I worked for a company called Lullabot. They're 100% distributed. So everyone just worked from their house, and that's what we did. And I was finding new things over and over again, and I was incredibly excited about some of these new things I was finding, these new technologies and just new techniques that are out there. One of the earliest ones was like custom icon fonts, and the fact you could build your own custom icon font on your local machine. And I was just like blown away. I'm like, drop an SVG in, run a command, you got a new icon font. It was just ridiculous. So I had some local friends here in Portland who are actually now coworkers. But back then, they're just friends who was working in Portland. I'm like, hey, I've got this cool stuff. I got to show it to you. And I did that a couple times with him, and he's like, dude, this stuff is awesome. Next time we do this, let's bring in the whole crew. He worked with like 4 or 5 guys over in the office. So I basically just like ended up once a week doing a, hey guys, check out this cool little like random new SAS thing I found, or a new font compiler, or whatever the case was. And we just do it as a Google Hangout. A couple of them would join, and just give a little presentation and be done with it. And we did that a couple times, and I'm like, I should really just be recording these, because it came up that someone wasn't able to make it one week, and they're like, hey, can you record it? I'm like, yeah, actually that makes sense. Well, I should record this. That makes sense. So you can watch it later, and maybe other people can watch it later. And started doing that for a while. And I remember specifically it was a Thursday night after a front-end meetup down in Portland, where we all went out for wings at one of the best wings places in Portland. And we were sitting there drinking our beers, eating our wings, and I'm like, okay, what is happening here? There's some momentum here, and I don't know exactly what to do with it. So I was asking some friends about it, because I just started up PDX-SAS a little while ago. So that was just a couple months previously. So I didn't know if this video thing should be just an extension of PDX-SAS. Should it just be PDX-SAS online? Should it be what? I really didn't know what to make of it. And one person came back with really good advice of like, no, I think you should just brand it separately, have it as its own thing and promote it as its own thing and just run with it. Um, and actually, just to step back a little bit, another friend of mine had started something kind of similar recently called Dev Lunch, or that's what she was calling it. And it was like hey, let's get together and talk about Bash scripts or something like that. And I was like, okay, Dev Lunch. That's kind of neat because she did during lunch, and it was just a small little piece of code hangout kind of thing. I was like, that lunch thing is kind of nice. I could call it SAS Lunch. And I was like, no, or SAS Bites. Oh, I like that. So it all came together. I had a name, had a concept, had a platform, and starting out, I didn't 100% know exactly what I was going to do, but I wanted to start sharing what SAS could do, and started out with the basic essentials of what are mixins, what are extends, and those types of things. I just started kind of contacting and kind of create a network or being connected with a network within SAS. So some friends up in Seattle, some friends locally here. I actually started doing kind of more of a guest show where people would come on and start presenting. But eventually, it's tough to keep finding more people to present because it takes preparation. So I just got to the point where I was like, all right, I'm okay with this. This is just going to be me stepping up and just presenting something each week. And it just kind of went from there. So if you go back to some of the earliest episodes, you'll see just all sorts of craziness of people joining the hangout because it was just everyone just joined the hangout instead of just watching it, and then random guests and just kind of stuff like that. And then from there, hopefully I didn't lose Chris. He just went dark. Oh, okay. Oh, it brings up the page. Hey, nice. Okay. So from there, realized I've got this platform. I'm starting to get followers on Twitter. Smashing Mag, I think, tweeted out about it, and I kind of freaked out because I was actually starting to get followers on the page. And then, it just kind of went from there. Started to do some interviews. I think Hampton Catlin, the creator of SAS, was one of my first pure interviews. It was kind of exciting. Started to get some of the people on there. Did a series about leading up to SASConf and talking to all of the speakers for that. And then just recently got in a series specifically about front-end architecture, which I'm sure we'll touch on later. But it was just I realized I finally had this platform. I had this voice that I could get out there to start sharing, and it's been an awesome ride. The feedback from it, the opportunities that have come from it, and it's so simple. It's 20 minutes a week. I fire up YouTube, I talk, and then I stop, and I'm done. Yeah. And is
that one reason? Why did you go with YouTube as your platform?
Well, it started with Hangouts. It started with the fact that we'd already been using Hangouts pretty extensively. Heck, when I got hired on at Lullabot, my interview was actually was a Hangout. So we'd been kind of embroiled in Hangouts for a long time. And then when Hangouts on Air came out, it was this easy evolution of okay, I could just have a Hangout. I click a button and I'm broadcasting and I'm recording all to the actual branded channel. So that was kind of the awesome point. And it took me a little bit to get there, but realizing that I had a SAS Bytes account, I had a SAS Bytes Google Plus page, whatever, and I could spin up a Hangout, I could record, and I automatically have a video that got pushed out to my channel and got pushed out to all the followers and all those kind of things. So. And not to mention, just when it started, it was a very visual medium because obviously I'm showing code all the time, and the way we showed code was let's hop in a Hangout and share screens and show the code. So, and I'm lazy. I really don't want to record and then edit because once you're in the point of editing, I could have edited a little bit more. I could have made that a little better. I could have taken out the ums. I could have done this and that and the other, and just going straight to tape is it's in the can. It's done. There's nothing you can do about it. So
exactly.
No, actually, I admit I recanted on one episode. I had an episode I did on Thursday, and technical failures, just the whole thing bombed. And I'm the next day I'm okay, delete. Let me do this again because this is a great topic and I want to do it right. So I got it right the next time. So that was the only time it was so bad I had to redo it.
Right. Cool. Yeah, it's Yeah, I don't know. It's just one of the things we've always done here at Non-Breaking Space is just tape live. Except I think a couple times we've gone back to edit, but I think someone dropped the F-bomb or something like that. But
Sorry.
not that. No, yes.
Sam.
I didn't want to call you out, Sam, but when we're not pressing record, Sam is just a sailor. Just one of the guys. So cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and that's one of the things that I liked about the Hangout just past year. I've just been I guess enamored. I don't know if that's the right word for it, but just with Hangouts. I guess YouTube more so than Hangouts because I've actually stayed away from Hangouts. Just the whole
No,
Google
it's tough to get you in a Hangout. It's like,
yeah.
okay, FaceTime?
No, FaceTime, Skype. I'll do anything, but the Google Hangout. Yes, yeah. It just I feel like Google already owns calendar spacing, like space calendars. So it's kind of weird. Like if you don't have yourself tied to a Google Calendar, then it's really hard to interact with people. I know it's like some businesses in Austin, what I had talked to, they like their entire life is on Google Calendar, and my life is not. And so if I set up a morning appointment with them, it's like I gotta go dig up my calendar for Google, and it's just like
you just gotta drink the Kool-Aid and jump 2 feet in. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah. So it's, give Google all the power, and I was like, oh, please, thank you. But YouTube, I felt like it's like, oh man, that's they got me with Hangouts. I think that's like the YouTube. I think
it's
cool.
Pretty
Yeah,
cool.
so
I was going back on some of the tweets that you have, and I saw a screenshot that you done. I think Elise is in it, and some other people, and it was like episode 42 to 46, I think, and it's like everyone's hands are up, and everyone's just excitedly talking about SaaS things. So I think that adds a lot of value and emphasis to things.
And it wasn't even intentional. It was seriously like, YouTube will just grab random stills and you could pick from them.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't even think I picked those. There's like, I just went back to it and looked. I'm like, everyone's like this, and it's so if I do this for most of the episode, you'll probably get this as a still. Just kidding.
Yeah.
We should do that.
Yeah, we should do that. So right now, everyone's like, oh. There you go. Cool. Yeah. So, but yeah, I also think I think it was that Google Hangouts is that was it Poor Man's Podcasting, because you subscribe to SaaS Bites, which I think people who are interested in the show, like Non-Breaking Space or listening, should just subscribe to it. It's like with every week when there's a new show, you'll get an email straight from Google that says like, hey, here's Micah has a new show, and you've been busy the whole week. Bam, here it is. And you, Micah, have like, you're being lazy, but you're being a programmer, and you're just like, hey, let Google do the work
it's
for you.
automated. I mean, that's I have a workflow, and it's a very automated workflow, and I'm totally okay with that. I do wish that the one thing that's missing, and if Google's out there listening, which I'm sure they are, I mean, right? Okay.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Is all I want is the ability to turn on, let people download, or like cache or download a copy of or whatever of the episode. Like, I'm not trying to make money off of it. Like, if you want to put ads, interstitials, whatever, I don't care. But like the biggest shortcoming of YouTube is that they just don't have offline viewing. Now they have offline viewing for, I think, for some of their paid stuff, or I know there's been some recently, but yeah, you can't just do offline viewing of a random episode. And that would be amazing. I mean, that would basically turn YouTube into the ultimate podcasting app. Because right now you have to create an RSS feed, and then you got to host a file somewhere and get. I don't even know. So that would be a coup if they could pull that off. A lot of people want to watch it on their way to work or something, but they don't want to suck up a bunch of data. There's just nothing they can do. So well.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like I don't know. I don't think YouTube is trying to be the ultimate podcasting.
But it could be.
I don't think that's their game.
Just dream bigger.
Just dream bigger, man. Everyone is doing their own serial podcast. That's what's going to happen.
Forget the self-driving car. Just focus on live podcasting in video format.
Okay, cool. Oh man. Cool. So let's just say I have a really nice segue for the next part, which I don't. But front end architecture, because at CSS DevConf in New Orleans this year, your talk was New Orleans.
New Orleans.
New Orleans. Was raising a banner for front-end architecture. Was that the title?
That's about right.
That's about right. Yeah, I got some of the words in there, most of them. Yeah, could you explain what you mean by that and what that means?
Sure, I've got a 45-minute talk. You ready to start? Just kidding.
Yeah.
Well, it's two-part. Raising a banner is basically the notion that, and this was kind of part of the talk, is that we started this whole web thing as this real simple, like, I'm a webmaster and I edit HTML and I edit the CSS and maybe a JavaScript file, and then the web grew and the web grew and the web grew, and we started getting more of these disciplines. We get backend developers and front-end developers, and we got ops people. We've got front-end ops people. We've got content strategists. We've got it just keeps growing. The number of people, the number of specialties that are created in the space, and it's not. I was just reading an article today about specialization versus generalization, and it's not specializing just to have a cool title. It's oftentimes it's specializing so that you can find other people that specialize in the stuff too, so that you can start creating a community. One of my big examples was content strategy. Of there's all these people out there doing content strategy, but they didn't really know that they weren't alone. They didn't realize there were other people doing it as well, because they didn't really have this rallying banner, and that's the whole point of raising a banner. So I found myself over the last couple of years spending more time thinking about how I was going to build something than actually. Yeah, it was a list apart article. That's right, and I spent more time thinking about how I was going to build something than actually going and building it. And the value I was bringing to a project during that thinking was really amazing. Like if I get in a project where I get a chance really to think about the project before building it, the outcome was always so much better. And I'm like, wow, this is really amazing. And realizing that I'm not the only person that actually does this. There's other people that spend more time thinking than doing, and more time planning than actually executing. And basically come to the conclusion that I'm architecting the front end solution for this project. I might be going then and actually building it out, which is always good to kind of eat your own dog food in those cases. But I was putting these plans together of how this thing was going to be built. So realizing that there's a name for this that at least I wanted to coin, that there's other people doing this as well. That I wonder who else is out there that doesn't understand the value of this, that doesn't understand that this is a thing, that you're not alone, and that or doesn't understand the complexity of this space. So yeah, that's why I came up and basically it was a twofold. There's a rallying cry for all the architects to say, like, stop letting people walk over you when you want to have a plan for the site. Like, stand up, raise up that banner, and say, like, I have a plan of how this site can be successful, and we need to talk about it now while we're planning the whole site, not after the entire CMS has been built and you just want to slap a theme on it, which is really where a lot of it have been for a long time. So it was a rallying cry for them. I was basically like, take up your arms, let's go fight, kind of thing. But it was also on the other side of let's talk to those decision makers. Let's talk to those. To the project planners. Let's talk to the people, the sales people that are going out there and selling.
Right.
Let's make sure that they understand that this is an important part of the process, that a successful project is going to have a sound front-end architecture. And if you can go in and you can sell that to the client, get the client to realize, hey, if I spend some money and bring some front-end developers in here early, right, I'm going to save myself headaches in the future and save myself money in the future. And that's a big paradigm shift. It's a big change to basically bring the developer in as soon as you bring a designer or a back-end developer in, and was basically trying to create a case for that as well, just to give front-end architecture the respect, the time, and the attention that it deserved and that it needed.
So, like you bring up content strategy a little bit, and so content strategy, like, we've had Christina Halverson on their show before, and we talked about, that was a couple years ago now, but back then, it was still kind of growing, but it's, I think it's solidified now as a discipline even more so than it was before. And to me, like, my, I guess, really simple way of thinking about content strategy was that it's copywriters who know what they're doing, being at the forefront and saying that content is very important, and so why are you building a website? We need to know what content we have, make sure we do the content analysis, and make sure we market and write and do everything up front before we put it into silos and before we launch it off into like responsive emails, templates, before we put it into responsive websites, stuff like that. So like we have to deal with what Karen McGrain talks about chunking of content and stuff like that. So that's we're actually, instead of where content has always been a pain point for web design ever since like it started out, and that's still been a pain point for print design before the web came about. It was like okay, we know this is a problem. It doesn't get any better the further out from the start of the project. So it's concentrated just now like at the front end of the project. So so it sounds like a similar path with front end architecture, right?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. Is that these aren't decisions that we can make at the end of a project, because at that point everything's already done. I mean, there's way too many decisions that have been made, it's set in stone, and that to change them, sure you could change it. So you could front end architect a project in the middle of the project, but the cost of doing that, they're never going to allow. They're never going to say, all right, devs, we got to wait 6 weeks because we have like mountains of technical debt to work through before we can actually start building again. Like, no, they're not going to give you the chance to do that. At that point, it's like, just make it look pretty and let's move on. Is really where we end up. So if an architect can get in the beginning, if we can talk about like, well, what are the goals? Like, is this a multi-site? Is it a single site? Or do we have other assets or other properties that need to inherit some of these styles as well? Like, how are we going to be controlling theme? Are we changing theme? I mean, how do you want to reuse pieces, modularities, layouts, those kind of, there's lots of these decisions that need to be made up front, all the tooling process, deployment process, automation, testing, visual regression testing, documentation, all these things that need to happen really early in the project that you can't just bolt on later. And the thing is, it doesn't take a ton of time to figure those things out, but they just need to be done at the proper time. So as you're building, you can actually devote time and resources to those. And the response, I think, was quite telling. I mean, I don't know if you caught much of this, but after the talk, I had several people come up and say, I'm doing that. I'm an architect. I didn't realize it. Which is, honestly, I wasn't expecting the response, and I don't know why, but the response is exactly what I should have been expecting from it, is like, that message resonated. I realize what I'm doing is I'm being an architect, and I need to make sure that I can get in the projects early enough to make the proper impact. So it was really exciting. And Elise Holiday, who's co-hosting this series with me, is one of those people that, like, just a light went off that that's what I do. Like, this is my passion. This is what excites me. And I didn't realize it had a name. I didn't realize that other people were doing it as well. And that's what I'm trying to do. It doesn't need to be a title. You don't need to have a fancy desk. You don't need to have it on your business card. But just to realize
it helps.
It helps. Yeah, I don't mind that. I mean, you can put it on the license plate of my new Porsche if you really want to. But just to recognize that is something that's important. It's a role that people play, and not that they have to only do architecture. I mean, most of us do architecture, but also then build the things that we've architected. But just to recognize it, and to have that recognition that this is important and it needs attention.
So I'm really curious about this. Sorry, Chris, to cut you off a little bit. For people who had come up to you after or that light bulb going off for Elise, what are some of the resources now that there is a little bit of a community growing with this? What are they kind of doing together to help push this forward?
I put together a repo in GitHub. It was kind of just pulling together my thoughts on front-end architecture. If you go to just my Twitter handle on GitHub, so GitHub/Micah Godbolt, there's a front-end architecture repo there that just has some like basic outlines, some basic tenets. We're kind of collecting some of the thoughts that are coalescing around that. Obviously, we've been doing the series on front-end architecture on SaaS Bytes, so you should definitely be listening to SaaS Bytes to get that as well. But as far as materials. And what was the exact question again?
Well, yeah, it was more like things like the repo. Like now that people are like, I think I'm this. Like, what do I do now? Like, I was
Yep.
curious about, are people now getting together in conversations? Are they listening to the current series you have on SaaS Bites? Are people documenting the challenges that they're facing now that they're kind of in this like, I think I'm this new thing? But there's also like trying to get in there early on and be a part of the whole process. Like, are there other challenges that come up that the community has talked about? And I'm just really curious about it because this is also kind of newer to me.
In some ways, there's not as much as I'd like, and there's some ways there's more than I'd ever expect. So I guess that's maybe a good thing. It kind of balances in the center. I'd love to see more articles. I'd love to see more people like talking about it, and especially just pushing the title out there. I don't care if I coined the title or someone else did. It needs a title. Like content strategist and content strategy is, or responsive web design is another example I use. They're awesome names. They're a name you can kind of gravitate around. So getting that out there. Mina Markham, who has done a lot of stuff with E4H, and actually looking at a tweet from her on my feed. She posted something about like she kept on getting added to front-end architecture lists on Twitter, and she says, "Thanks, Micah," kind of thing. So it's happening. People are talking about it. I actually got contacted randomly from someone interested in doing a front-end architecture conference. That's where I was like, okay, now this is getting serious.
Right.
So it is happening. There's a lot of conversation. It's been really neat having some of these guests on. A lot of these guests, kind of to backtrack just a hair, the four tenets that at least I have come up with for front-end architecture at the moment is basically it's code, documentation, testing, and process. Code being pretty nebulous, just kind of like coding approaches. Documentation is how do you document the systems? How do you pass on that legacy to the next person? How do you make sure that someone new coming in is going to be able to get up to speed quickly? Testing, everything from visual regression testing, end-to-end testing, unit testing, and then process, which is a lot of like, what's your Git flow process? What's your automation? What's your deployment process? What's your continuous integration process? Those kind of things. So I really feel confident those four pillars have been around since I gave the talk, and they have not changed yet. So I feel good that those are kind of like the big four areas that front-end architecture is about. I mean, no one's been able to properly challenge me and say, hey, what about this? And we can go, all right, 5. So 4 has worked really well.
Right.
And a lot of the people I've been able to bring in to speak fall really strongly in one of those 4. Which has been kind of neat because like they're really, really big on documentation and style guides, or they're really big on like really cool coding standards and whatnot, or really big on testing. And to talk to them kind of about the whole thing as a whole entity, it's kind of neat. It opens up some of the things they haven't thought about or haven't talked about, and it's just been a great opportunity to kind of even with the people that I really respect of like, hey, let's talk about this whole thing as a package because you're doing awesome contributions to this part of it. What do you do? What do you do with documentation? What do you do with your coding standards? And bringing up those conversations with them as well. So it's been a lot of fun to kind of see this thing grow up. And it's only been 5 months or so. So I don't want to stop. I want to keep it going. I think there's a lot of conversations that still have to be done about visual regression testing. Is still crazy hot. Documentation. Gosh, there's documentation podcasts showing up. There's Style Guides, I believe, is a website that's just all about style guides. So all of the tenets in here, and obviously automation is huge and always will be. There's a lot happening around all of them. And part of it is, front-end architecture doesn't own any of those by any means. Just like responsive web design that came, it basically packaged together a bunch of stuff that was already happening. I'm not trying to say this is something new. I'm trying to say this is a focus. This is something that people can kind of get under and start developing and pulling all these different areas together. So there's lots of stuff going on in each 4 of those pillars, and it's kind of fun to start pulling them together and having those conversations with people that are involved in those pillars to say like, how does this affect your whole architecture?
Right. Well, I do want to just take a step back, just because I feel like we kind of flew by what those pillars were. So I just want to take them one by one and just talk about them and how they work. And some of them are from my background, kind of easier to understand the others. But one of the first pillars of the four that you have is code, right?
Yes,
and so that includes like the markup. That includes CSS, Sass. So you have your which is, and then you have JavaScript is in there too. You have JavaScript frameworks and organization, but also the object-oriented approach. So basically you have the building blocks for a web page, right? So you have the nouns, the verbs, the adjectives for your web page is just the code, right?
Exactly. I mean, it's really everything else is about the process around the code. The code portion of it, and one thing to clarify, I've tried to keep these pillars very short names and not this long descriptive thing. When I talk about code, it's not the actual code itself. It's more of as an architect trying to build a building. When you talk about materials, you're not talking about every single piece of wood or every single chunk of concrete or every single piece of rebar. You're talking about well, which rebar are you using and what kind of concrete are you using and what's your approach to doing this, that, and the other. And I'm sure some architect is just going, oh, whatever. But so it's not the finished result of the code, but it's really about what's your approach. Are you doing straight OO, or are you doing something that's more individual class based? I had Ben Frayne on just yesterday, and he takes a very antithesis of OOCSS with his approach, and that's single class for everything. Repetition isn't bad because repetition means that every component is very quarantined, and that you can delete components with impunity, knowing that you're not going to disrupt the rest of the system. Personally, I love a lot of the stuff that he does, and it's one of the reasons I had him on to talk about that. But I mean, the point is, depending on your project, depending on what you're trying to build, you're going to have to choose something. There's front-end architecture is not here to say that OOCSS is bad and you should do this.
Right.
It's just to say you need to have a naming convention. You need to have an approach. You need to understand what are you doing with JavaScript so that you don't just have this huge JS file that just is jQuery, point at a selector and change some other selector, that just spaghetti code. So, what's your HTML approach? What are you doing with HTML5? How are you doing with articles and sections and all that? What's your what's the role of ARIA? How far are you going with that? So just what is your code approach? Not the finished code, but really just making sure that there's some kind of there's some standards. Because really what it comes down to is you need something to fall back on. Hopefully it's documented. That's the next one too. But you need something to fall back on when a merge request comes in, so that you can say we're not doing it that way because that's not going to fit with this paradigm or this approach. Let's go and refactor that. Let's do that differently. I just had something recently like that. I had a merge request come in and go that works. And for anyone looking at it, it solves the problem, but it doesn't solve the problem in a way that contributes to the architecture of the rest of the site. And one of the things I kind of tried to pound in when I was talking about people in charge of the Scrum and part of the charge of planning your build process is make sure that everything that we're doing, every story that comes in, is contributing to the architecture of the site, and it's not just one more thing added in, but we need to build something. Yes, that's true, but what's the best way that we can build it that's going to contribute to the architecture of the site? And we found that really changes the way that we build things, because now we're going okay, we're building we had this hero box. It's really it's 4 boxes in the bands, and really all it was 4 boxes. So it's how complicated could that be? Well, I know. Well, what are those 4 boxes? Is it layout? Are they components? Is it individual pieces? Is it multiple pieces? How can we reuse these? Because right now it's just a box with the word in it.
Right.
But can we reuse this pattern for something else that maybe has an icon in it and more text in it? Can we do 4? Can we do 6? Can we change the number of them? Can we do an interesting layouts and mobile views? How can we build something that not only is going to solve this one problem, but it's going to solve 4 or 5 or 6 other problems down the road.
Right.
And building something flexible enough that we've contributed to the ecosystem of our site rather than, oh, here's just one more piece of code being shoved in. So having those code approaches, making sure that all the code that you're writing is contributing to that architecture, and having some kind of standards that you can gauge those merge requests on, of like, we can do better than that. Like we're aiming for that. This is aiming for that. And you can see my arms.
Yes.
and we know they're not. We know they're not aligned.
For those people listening to the audio version, Micah is flailing around
rapidly.
Yes.
So and without that architecture, you would just keep building stuff. You would never have anything to go back to. You never have anything documented of like, this is our approach. And when you have large teams, you need it.
Yeah. So basically, it's just like, it's not just the fact that you're gonna have JavaScript. It's like, are we gonna, like, just for a basic example, it's like you're gonna have JavaScript, but do you want to include the jQuery library, or do you just want to do vanilla JavaScript? Those are some of the basic questions you would have asked before you start. Right.
Yeah, but also, like, what kind of libraries are we going to use? Are we using lots of third-party libraries? Are we throwing Bootstrap at it? Because I'd really like to be able to have that discussion, whether or not we're going to throw Bootstrap at it, because it's not a trivial thing to do.
Right.
How reusable is our JavaScript? How modular is our JavaScript? Are we using any of the new cool packaging things that are coming out? Like, there's tons of things that you can do. And part of it is looking at the requirements of the project. Like, you might get to the beginning of the project and go like, this is going to be horrible with jQuery, like seriously horrible. So why don't we look at maybe Angular, maybe look at React? Like, can these other like things solve our problems? And it's great discussions to have at the beginning of the project. It's really horrible discussion to have at the beginning of a sprint when you have a feature due in 2 weeks.
Right.
And I had that happen with a project. I was on for 3 weeks. I basically spent 2 weeks of it trying to do it in jQuery, and it was horrible because I had to like manage all these different states on the page and click on one thing and 5 things change and those kind of things, and it was only going to get bigger from there. And then I was like, can we get Angular in here? I've worked with Angular before. I know it can do this well. And they're like, yeah, okay, I think we can do that. Let's go ahead and pull that library in. Within 3 days, I'd recreated like the entire thing I'd been trying to do over the last 2 weeks, because the tools Angular brought were perfectly suited for what we were trying to do. And that's architecture. The code that gets written, that's just a developer doing what they do and doing it well. But making sure that developer has the tools to do it is really what's important. One of the big tenets you'll see at the top of none of the tenets, or maybe our motto, I think is a good way to put it, is that front-end architecture. The code, we still write lots of code as a front-end architect. We're writing code all the time, lots of JavaScript, especially with task runners these days. But the code that we write isn't production code. It's not code that the user ever sees. The code we write, our audience is the developers. So as we write code, as we write documentation, as we build and plan and create things, our audience is the developer, because we want to make sure the developer can build quickly, can build with proper testing involved, can document easily and properly, and they can get out the door, with little fuss and little trouble. So everything an architect does is building something for a developer. So the developer doesn't have to like, oh, I'm going to use Ember, and oh, this other developer, oh, I'm going to use jQuery, and someone else, I'm going to use Angular. The decisions made at the beginning. We've thought about all the challenges and opportunities, and we decided on one, and we have a plan for moving forward with it.
Okay.
So that's one.
That's one. So we only have an hour to go, so hopefully get the three. So the code is like how you build it. Everyone has their own philosophies on how to build a website, and so you would definitely want to have like the discussion beforehand, if you're on a team basis, or and then documentation, like that's always a big thing. Just having documentation is always great. So in documentation, you have like three parts of documentation. One is onboarding docs, style guide, and pattern library, which is a big deal. I mean, and then architecture diagrams. That was, like you said, code flow and tool chain. So can you talk about those 3 things part of documentation?
Sure. Is this on the Git repo? I'm totally forgetting most of these. onboarding docs is pretty kind of self-explanatory, but any good architecture, any well-architected project should be git clone, npm install, grunt or gulp or whatever it is. If you've got a project that's like way more complicated than that, your onboarding process gets really difficult. So
right. So basically, you're saying like you should set up your project, just like the onboarding is just like, hey, just download it, and then just run Node and just run gulp, and you should be good to go. You have the project ready to roll.
Yeah, and I mean, like we've got built-in like we have dependencies. Like if you go to the README file for our for the project we're building, here's the dependencies. We use bundler, so go install bundler. We need Node, go install Node. We need Bower, go install Bower. So here's the dependencies. Once you're done, git clone, run one command, and sure, it doesn't work 100% of the time, but 95% of the time it works all the time. So it's okay. Thank you. Okay, good. And the great thing is when you start, if you need to make changes or add something or add more functionality, it's right in your build process, and you don't have to train people. Like, for instance, we basically we're creating a pattern library that we distribute via Bower to our actual CMS. So we're not even committing styles directly into our CMS, which is great because it means we don't have to worry about they've got a huge testing process before any code can get introduced. And we're like, well, we're just changing CSS. Why do you need to test every single behavior test under the sun? And well, that's what they do, and that makes sense. But so because of that, if I remember where we're going with this, because of that, yes, we push out releases. So we push out 0.3, and then we do a pre-release of it. We push out a new pre-release, and okay, now we're 0.3.0, and now we need to push out a bug fix 0.3.1, and so on and so forth. So that's how we push things out via Bower. It's able to seamlessly pulled in, and then they can test the new release and those kind of things, and everything works great. But to create a release isn't trivial. Like it's a process. Like because for one, we're not committing our assets, and the assets are really what go out and drive the site. So all the CSS and the compiled fonts and images and all that kind of stuff, we're not committing all of those compiled assets to code. So you can't just create a tag and just go grab it. So we have this process of creating a temp branch, compiling, committing, tagging, moving back, deleting the old branch, pushing the tag, blah, blah, blah. So it's a process. It works for now, but it's a process. So what we've done is we've gone in and said, well, we can automate this.
Yeah.
We've got the tools. So creating a git process where you basically type in a git command, and it does that entire process for you. Mm-hmm. So yeah, this is an onboarding doc, so I know I'm jumping the shark on that, but it's making sure that you've built stuff that now we have on our onboarding docs. Here are the 4 commands that you run to bump the versions. Cool. And that's huge, rather than here's this 5-page doc that you have to go through and run all these commands, and if you screw up, well, you just totally hose the live site. So make sure you don't screw up. So having onboard documentation means that you can bring a new developer in, they can start working day 1, day 2, rather than week 5 or 6, which I know many projects, that's how long it takes for someone to get up and running. Whether it's getting their system up and going, whether it's just learning the ropes of what you're actually building. Right. So onboarding docs, obviously huge.
Right. Cool. And then style guide, pattern library, is this, is that it's there's a podcast now with that Brad Frost is doing,
and Anna Debenham.
Yeah, and so is that the sort of thing where you just?
I told you it's hot right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why is it hot right now? What makes it hot?
Well, as soon as Brad Frost comes out doing a full dedicated podcast to it, it's usually pretty hot. And it's also, I think, just everyone's moving towards needing that and wanting it. The short story is that I've been working with Red Hat is the client we're doing all this work with, and we basically just built their site. We had to do it real quick. The site's done, and they come back to me and go hey, could we create a pattern library? And I'm like, you mean of all the stuff that we just spaghetti together? No. That's kind of the thing you do before you build the website. Yeah. But like a lot of companies are coming to this realization that there's huge value in this, and
Right.
and for us now that we're basically building this new repo of patterns that we're going to be then, or we are incorporating into the old site, is we need to have a style guide, we need to have a pattern library, and for a couple of reasons. For one, we work in Drupal. I can't tell you the hours lost working on on the event detail page, because the event detail page has a lot of content on it, like dozens, 40, 50 different fields or something like that. And we had to go in and style all of those fields. Problem was, like every time our site builds, we get a fresh database in there, and there's no event in there that actually has every single field. So basically, anytime we need to build something, we're logging in, we're going through admin interfaces, building content just so we can style a button or something like that.
Right.
And that was our day in and day out. So having a pattern library gives us a huge number of advantages. For one, download repo, npm install grunt. Hey, we've got a style guide up and running with all of your content that you can go in and start working on like seconds later. You don't have to spin up MAMP. You don't have to get the database pulled down. You don't have to worry about like pulling in from sandboxes and just everything we had to do for that. You have this local copy that you can just start editing on. They're also static files, so we can push it up to a server and we can point it to a backend dev and say, hey, take a look at this. What do you think?
Yeah.
It's like the whole thing's built and prototyped and whatever we want to do with it, and they can take a look at it and poke at it. We can send this over to decision makers. We can actually do this to the business analysts, and people are actually like developing these features and signing off on these features of like, hey, this is what we're prototyping, this is what we're building in this style guide, what do you think?
Yeah.
And get feedback there before it even gets to the CMS. And then once it's done, it's locked and loaded. It's in that style guide for reference in the future of like, hey, I want to do this one thing. Hey, well, let's go back to the style guide. Let's see, have we built something like this? Have we already built it? Can we use stuff that we've already built and create this new thing we're doing? Hey, I need to see the list of all the icon fonts that we have. Where in the world do I find those? So these style guides and pattern libraries, they're a common. I'm trying to think what we call it. Like it's a common development environment where everyone can get in there. The barrier of entry is super low because we can throw it up on a server and people can use it. Right. The barrier to edit it is crazy low because it's a grunt task. And so we now have one common environment where people can see the components, can see the layouts, can see everything about our system, and be able to poke holes in it and ask questions about it and reference those elements with actual URLs, which is something we didn't have ever. I mean, show me an example of an event content type. I don't know where I can find one. But in the style guide, you've got those right there. It's searchable, it's viewable, and you can get to those anytime you want. The other big advantage of a style guide, and we'll get to that with testing, is that it gives you an amazing platform to test against.
Right. Because
you have static content that never changes, that is a perfect representation of what you're building in your website, and it's a great place to start testing. But to finish up the last one before we get there, the whole concept of architectural diagrams, code flow, tool chains is, I'm not a big fan of magic boxes. So the last thing I want to do is create a magic box. So what we want to make sure that we have is documentation that explains, like, if I get hit by a bus tomorrow and grunt stops working, like, someone's got to be able to come in there and figure out what's happening. So whether it's like inline documentation, your grunt file, or writing out your processes for this is kind of like code flow. So like how's code get into our repos? How do we do the how do we deploy new code, new versions of those types of things? That if that's locked in one person's brain, you're in a lot of trouble because that's the only person that can do it. If they're gone for a week, you're out of luck, and those.
Or Burning Man, whatever, what have you.
Yes. Not growing a beard on sabbatical, So it's really just have everything documented so that you could disband the entire development team, bring in an entirely new development team, and they could pick up and start working on the project. Is really what you're trying to do. And the thing is, documentation does take time. And that's part of the architectural point of it is like, sure, there's people that can be writing documentation,
Right.
But the fight for the architects is say this is valuable work. Like don't point these stories at 2 when I know I've got a ton of documentation. Like let's point these at 5 because I know I'm going to be spending several hours making sure this is documented properly.
Right.
And,
and also like this documentation is like very minor, like in terms of way, like because a pattern style guide library, if you just use one that's already been built or modify one to your own devices, it's pretty easy. You don't have to like recreate too much of a wheel. And then with onboarding docs, you do have to do some things, but even then, that's like 3 or 4 command keys. I think the most complex thing would be to like really find a way, if you're like a vendor hiring agency or something, to find that architecture diagram to be the main part of it. Like, so.
There's a really loud ping, whatever that was.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the ping is.
Okay.
That might be me.
Okay.
That might be Slack. For me, I think like documentation is now completely changed my process in general, because like you're thinking about it from the start, you know it's going to be a part of the stage, so as you're going through those early talks or those early meetings, it's something that you're already planning for. So if it's not an afterthought, it's pretty easy to bring in and kind of just keep adding a little bit more to it. And then like I think back to, as if this has stopped, it hasn't really stopped, but like in branding and marketing stuff, there's a lot of like the printed brand standard guides, and then it's like you're not sure if it's the latest version, and here you have something that's live and changeable, and like you said, like everyone can get to this, and it's a great thing that you can test on. It's just, I feel very nice and calm when you have all of that together and you get to look at these elements separately and as a system. I think that also shows a client that, you know, there is a lot in those details, and it's very valuable, like you said.
Yeah. Right. Well, the reason I bring that up is just because it's like, I mean, it's like documentation is like it's almost like content. Like no one wants to write content, but they always want it, right? So they want it done, and they want to move on. And so you always hear about programmers not wanting to do documentation and stuff like that. And I think with agile programming, it's like they favor quick releases over writing extensive documentation. If I have that right. So I just
that sounds about right.
Yeah. So it's like oh, we're all agile because we don't want to write documentation. Is how I feel.
Well, and even if developers are willing to, it's a time thing. I mean, Red Hat is. I can sing praises for Red Hat all day long, which is why they love me going out and talking about them. They give us that freedom and that time. Like they let us point like 4 boxes on a page as a 5 or an 8 or something. And trust us that like we know it's going to take some time to document this properly and build out all the features we want to do with it, and they give us that time to actually do it. Like it's a task in a story. Is the documentation done? Yes, no. If it's not done, keep working at it. Like the story's not done until the documentation's done. And kind of as Chris said too, the other nice thing about documentation is there's lots of good tools out there. Whether you're doing like straight up pattern lab for really just like documenting all of your components, or if hologram is what we're using, which is a great gem for pulling inline documentation and making a style guide out of it. There's tons, and basically the joke is basically after you use 2 or 3, you end up rolling your own anyway. So there's new ones popping up left and right, and there's just some amazing tools out there, and it really comes down to a content strategy problem, which is kind of funny. We come back to content strategy of we're now at a point where the tools are so simple, we just have to write it. We just have to figure out how am I going to express what I need to explain in a way that someone can ingest and understand. And how do I organize this so people can find it, because documentation is going to grow. We found ourselves at a funny point where we're trying to build this nice documentation. We're trying to do it aesthetically pleasing, so if you go to a page, it's easy to kind of parse component, and then see down the page. And so we started applying some design, do some like custom theming to the style guide. And we got to this really funny meta point where we're like, we really need to have like a style guide, or like a pattern library for the patterns for our pattern library. We need to prototype what our style guide is going to look like. And like, where do we do that? So it was funny. If you could bring a designer and a content strategist into that part of the process, that's huge, because documentation is really writing a short book, a short book about how does this system work from top to bottom. A friend of mine told a funny story of a project he's on, and they're like, we don't have time for documentation. Just write the code. Just get it done. Like, everything's on fire. Finish this. And then, weeks, months later, they're like, how does that work? I don't understand that. Where's the documentation? Like, well, okay, can we just record both of these moments and play them back to back?
Right.
Documentation is extremely important. And you find some people are much better at it and love it. My coworker at Red Hat, she really enjoys doing the documentation side of it, and so I'm more than happy to let her go to town on that, like do huge typography pages and stuff like that. And
that's awesome.
And you'll find people that gravitate to different areas like that. So documentation. You'll thank yourself later when you have all that done.
I mean, we had a client I was working for agency, and we had gone the distance. We got to the finish line. It was like 99% done for the website, and we're like, okay, it's loading, it's done. We can walk away from this project. And she came back. Our contact was just like, great, I need a manual.
Yep.
I was just like, what do you mean? It's like, and all of a sudden she got it into her head that she needed a manual, and like there was like no manual written in the contract whatsoever. There's like manuals like, well, I never buy anything without a manual, and I'm like,
my VCR has a manual, my website should have a manual.
Yeah, of course. It's like, why not? And so we had to give us a moment, just let us go figure out how to write this manual. It was like when we go around the office, like, hey, have you written a manual? I don't know, I don't know. But this is a long time ago. But yeah, it's just you just
So part of the architecture is having those conversations early. And if the client wants to say, no, I'm not willing to pay for it, then you've had that conversation. And
you write down a piece of paper.
Yes, and you sign it. And you take a picture with them holding the piece of paper. I don't remember that.
Right. And then you have it framed, and when they come back, you're just like, hey, remember this guy? This guy.
Yeah, you just point at it.
Oh, yeah. That's awesome.
Oh, goodness.
All right, so the next pillar is I'm really harping the pillar.
I love it. No, pillars are awesome.
I just want to let you know that. So is testing, and I'm actually kind of, I've done, is testing, which is also, people love testing, right? But,
yep, some people love testing. I actually, I had a moment the other day where I was writing some pretty involved tests or something, and I was like, I feel like a wizard. The stuff I am doing with testing, with the simple amount of code and the things I'm accomplishing with this testing, I felt like a wizard. It was pretty amazing. I don't know if I could do it all day long, but I enjoyed it.
Well, you were at CSS DevConf, and you were one of the 6 pencil winners. We actually give the best of. There it is right there. Let me see. Can you hold up again one more time?
Oh, nice.
Yeah. You stole the box.
You spelled my last name wrong, but that's
okay. Well, I could, dude. We could probably fix that. We have the technology to fix that.
Can you make it better, faster, and stronger?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Alicia was there, and she had her talk of unit testing, and it was kind of like an intro talk to unit testing for the audience there. But she also won the Giant Pencil Award because it was one of the favorite ones of the group. And so I would like to know more about unit testing, because what I know about unit testing is that you write a test, you write JavaScript to do X, Y, Z, but then you break that down into your JavaScript doing like minor parts, and then you do testing on that. Is that essentially correct, or am I just...
Yeah, well, there's various types of testing, and as I wrote down in here, I kind of pinpoint 3 of them, being visual regression, unit testing, and end-to-end testing.
Right.
Unit testing is very much kind of like functional testing. I don't even know if that's the right word, but it's basically making sure that your math continues to work.
Right.
I have this function, and if I pass a value in this function, I expect to get this result from the function. Right. It's very much when you're writing like JavaScript applications, where you're expecting a function to do something, return values, and those kind of things. So in a lot of cases, you won't get to much unit testing because, for instance, if all you're doing is writing jQuery all day long, jQuery doesn't really return a value. It returns like an actual change to the DOM.
Okay.
So I mean, personally, I want to learn more about unit testing. I was at that talk, and it was great.
Yeah.
It really opened my eyes to like, okay.
Yeah, she did a great job. Yeah.
And she broke it down so it was super simple, and I was like, that totally makes sense. Like, if I've got this calculator that's supposed to add 2 numbers together, I can test it. I can pass 2 numbers into it. I can look at the result, and I can test and make sure that value is the same. And it was neat to be in that session, because that whole concept of like passing two values in and getting a return it made a lot of sense even with visual regression testing, which is where I'm spending a lot of time. In that you do something and you expect a common response is really what testing is all about. Like every time I do this, I'm going to get the same kind of result. Right. And with visual regression testing, instead of adding two numbers together, adding 2 and 7 together and getting 9, what you're doing is you're loading a page, taking a picture of something, and then comparing the picture. But the point is that every single time you do that, it should be exactly the same, because these are computers, and computers are good at doing things exactly the same over and over again. So the concept behind visual regression testing is that they typically use something like Phantom.js or Casper, or no, sorry, not Casper, or shoot, I forgot what. There's a Gecko version of it. Someone will correct me at some point. So Phantom.js, Slimer.js, I think might be it. They've like all these ghost names. So I get them all confused. But it's a headless browser. It's a WebKit browser that JavaScript can spin up, do stuff in, and then stop. And it's faster because you're not dealing with all the rest of the Chrome of the browser and all that. It can run on a server that you don't need to have Chrome or something installed, and it's extremely consistent. It's like the same version of Phantom.js. So what the test does is it spins up that headless browser. It navigates to a web page, which in our case is a style guide every time. Goes to style guide, takes a picture. And I can do that over and over and over again, hundreds of times a day, and I will get the exact same picture every time I do that. So obviously you don't need to test 100 times a day. You typically just want to test whenever you introduce new code. But the idea is that's a repeatable test. 2 plus 7 always equals 9, no matter how many times you run it. If 2 plus 7 equals 13, something's messed up with, actually, I should have said 2 plus 7 equals 14. You probably got an operator switched in your function or something. Right. So it's the same thing for visual regression. Is you can run that over and over again, and if something changes, you knew something changed. You knew that a value changed, that a CSS property changed, that some JavaScript that you run in jQuery is not working right because the dropdown is not showing, or you're clicking a button and something's not resetting, or whatever the case is. So with visual regression testing, depending on the tool that you use, you're either testing full pages, or my preference is typically testing just single individual components. And so you go through your entire style guide, and you take snapshots of every single component, and you test and you compare those to a baseline image. And as long as they match that baseline image, everything's good. And hopefully you're building in a way that the person's work over here only affects what they're working on. Right. And the tests basically say, hey, before we merge that guy's code in, let's run all the tests for all the components and make sure nothing changed, because nothing should change except for the component the person's working on. And when you have failures, you're like, hey, you broke something. You changed a variable you shouldn't have changed. Or our system, we thought it would work this way if you did this, but it didn't. It worked a different way and it broke. So visual regression testing allows us to start building components, and components we built 3 months ago that we've created baselines for that clients have signed off on. We know that we have a test that we can run every single time code is introduced in the system to make sure nothing's changed. Because I can tell you without said testing, things will change. Right. More stories of like, I've got a story to build XYZ page. Okay, build it. It's done. They like it. Move on. Next sprint. Do my work. Sprint after that. Hey, I already finished this. Why am I doing the same page again? Right. Because something changed. Because someone changed the style. Someone overrid something. Somebody changed something that they thought was scoped and wasn't. Someone broke JavaScript. We're pulling in all this code from all these different developers, and if there's no way for us to verify that one component that we built, our first component of our entire system, if we can't ensure that thing's never going to change, then we don't have a system. We're just chasing tails day in and day out. Chasing our tails, probably a better way to say it. Anyway. So that's visual regression testing. Is allow you to find visual regressions in your site. You can also use it for for your live site. Say you have a home page that's static and never changes. It's a marketing page, and it makes a lot of sense. Just every day you've got some job that runs and compares the home page with the new image, and bells fly off if something changed, which can happen. Like someone deploys some server-side code, something or other, and now your JavaScript doesn't load, your CSS stops loading. Like those kind of tests, you can run those every 10 minutes. That's what automation is for. So there's a lot of places you can use visual regression, basically sanity checks for large systems that, in this mobile thing, when I click on this and hover over that, does the button do what you're expecting it to? Which might be it's something that you never actually ever get to normally, but you want to test it so it doesn't stay broken for 5 weeks before someone actually sees it.
Yeah, exactly. Like, oh, that was broken for 5 weeks and no one bought anything.
That's funny. I wonder how many users bailed out our shopping.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's amazing. Like, I just seeing, I work at in our industry, you get to see lots of companies and see how they build, and so it's amazing how when they walk through a process, a UX process, they just print out every workflow of like every stop along the way just to see how a user goes from point A to point Z, and just and there's like, and I look at that and I don't see, I see what they printed out, but I just see like a lot of teamwork has been spent, a lot of man hours been spent on agreeing that this was happening, and then agreeing what should happen next, and then just to be able to just test things, make sure things don't break in the middle of these sprint or code changes it's
well, that's also that's the third one, the end-to-end testing is that is get more or behavioral testing, I think sometimes it's called, of like, can I launch the site, click login, put my credentials in, go check an item out, go to shopping cart, hit blah blah blah, put in my credit card, and check out. Like those are other tests you're able to run. Sometimes that's a little bit more of like back end. Like I know our back end, it's more of kind of a back end dev process thing, but those are important tests to do as well to make sure that those paths of income, paths of revenue for your site actually work. Can people sign up for your newsletter? Like, does that work? If that's broken and it's been broken for weeks, you might have lost thousands of subscribers. So testing all over the place, whether it's visual, whether it's unit testing or end-to-end and behavioral testing, are really important things to talk about at the beginning of a project, because for us, we build tests as we build components. So it's like I build my component, I write my documentation, I write my tests. Now I can get this back for review, for merge requests, and all those kind of things.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. Pretty sweet. Okay, and then fourth pillar.
Sure. Process.
We're there. With the fourth final pillar. Let's pat ourselves on the back. All right. That'd be pretty awesome.
I was hoping we just wave our hands up in the air.
Let's do that.
All
right.
This one changed a little bit. This one used to just be automation.
Yeah.
And my joke at CSS DevConf is with great tools comes great automation kind of thing. And it's very true. Process is very much focused around automation, but there's lots more pieces than just the grunt, a grunt or gulp or whatever it is, and it's creating that, like, can I sit down in front of a computer? Well, it's not as much like the onboarding process. We kind of already talked about that, but I sit down on my computer and I write a line of code. How easy and efficient is it to get that line of code live?
Right.
And in some cases, that's really, really difficult,
right.
or convoluted, or just complex or confusing.
Or is it sometimes on purpose? Is it complex?
Well, no, it's just like, or maybe it's poorly documented, or like the process isn't like really like discussed. Like, oh well, I just push up to master. Oh no, I create a feature branch and I push here, and oh I do this or I do that. If there's not a standard of like we're doing Git flow. So whenever you have anything you want to do, you create a feature branch. You push the feature branch up. You create a merge request. Like that is, in a lot of cases, a lot of us take that for granted, but not everyone does that. Like that's not a set in stone process. And a lot of people also have like slight modifications of that. Like, do you push to master? Do you push to a dev branch? Do you, do you have multiple dev branches going because you have multiple versions of the software running? So those kind of decisions that need to be made for that, of how do I even get code into the repo in an efficient manner? Right. And then once it's in the repo, how does that code actually get out to testing servers? How does that code get out to staging servers? How does that get through automation? How does that get through testing? How does that actually get to production? It's the entire process of getting I changed the color of something to how does that color change actually get to a live website? Yeah. And it could be super simple. It could be I hit save and I FTP, or it could be a lot more complex. And you go through Git flow and you go through testing and you get through a stage and prod server, and then there's all that kind of stuff going on.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So and we talked a little bit about some of the things we talked about Node and Bower and build systems and build systems a little bit, but how many plugins I guess you want for Grunt and Gulp, what you need for that, for SVG, for icons, and Uglify and all JavaScript, so that deploy process depends on what you want to do, and continuous integration. What can you explain more about what continuous integration?
Sure. No, actually, I'm glad that you asked this today, not a couple days ago, because I had an inkling of what it did, but then someone brought it up, and I was like, I guess I don't know the exact definition. The concept of continuous integration is that developers are constantly bringing their code back into development, or back into basically constantly pulling code back into master. So instead of features being done in these huge silos, code's constantly being pulled back in, constantly tested, and basically the application's constantly being tested as new code is introduced to it. Okay. So you're not having here's our application. All right, now we're going way over here with this other code, and we're building. Mm-hmm. All right, we've done everything we need. All right, let's merge this thing back in, and I'm doing this big triangle thing. And
for those listening at home, Micah is doing a big circle with his hands.
Triangle. This triangle is over. Yeah. And then, oh my gosh, it broke. It doesn't work. I wonder why. So instead of pulling all this code in and hoping things work, and now we have to debug 5-6 months of work. Continuous integration is continually bringing every feature in, bring the feature in and test, bring the feature in and test, and continuously integrating code into it rather than having these big huge releases. Yeah, and a lot of that's done with some of the tools out there like Travis CI and Jenkins, and Travis CI is continuous integration. It's an obvious one, which are tools that allow you basically to automate a lot of these tasks, so that the gold standard, which we're still kind of working towards, but is when I push up a merge request, Jenkins should check that code out. It should compile the code. It should run all of the tests. It should report back pass or fail on all of those tests. And until we get a passing grade from Jenkins, that code should never be able to be merged back into master. And those are the continuous integration tools and process that allows you to constantly be testing your code as you're pulling it back into your project.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it's very awesome when we can get it going.
Yeah. For me, that one goes back to what you were saying earlier about this being an ecosystem, and kind of maintaining and respecting that ecosystem, and making sure that ecosystem doesn't I don't know, I'm trying to find a good metaphor for this. There isn't some foreign parasite that gets into this ecosystem and destroys it. Yeah.
There's so much code rot. This is one of the things that Ben Frayden talks about a lot, is that sure, he writes a little bit more verbosely, if that's a word. He writes a little bit more code for every feature he writes, but because of the way he compartmentalizes things, he can go back to old code he's not using anymore and just go delete without any fear whatsoever of breaking something. And we don't have those tools in place most of the time. We would rather, the site's not broken now. Let's not take that code out because it might break something. What it breaks, I don't know. I don't have a way to test it. It's 5,000 lines of CSS. I don't know if it's. I've been in projects that had legacy code from three redesigns ago, and it's still in the repo. It's still being applied to the pages. There's probably styles in there that actually affect our current page. I don't know which ones. I don't know what's going to break when I delete that, and I don't have any way to test it. So yeah, being able to create something where you have that kind of accountability of code, where I know when I bring code in, I can test to see if it broke something. I can make a sweeping change. Like there's a couple of like large architectural kind of code changes I want to make, and I can go in there and make the change and see if everything still passes.
Right.
Like I made these big, huge margin changes, kind of changed the way the margins work, and I can make sure I didn't break anything.
Right.
And most places you don't have the ability to do that, so you just don't do it. Or you do it and you're dealing with it for weeks and they're mad at you, and then you just basically revert anyway, and you just waste a lot of time. So yeah, it's a properly architected project is a really powerful place to be, because you're building something that gets better and better over time.
Right.
I speak to any front-end developer. The longer you work on a project, the worse it gets. And it really, you're just, at some point I get to bail from this and I get to start on a new project.
Right.
That's every single front-end project you're ever on.
Right.
It just gets more bloated, and this is more technical debt and more out of hand, and I can't wait to start fresh.
Right.
If we can reverse that, if we can say, hey, every time we introduce new code, this is getting better and better and better and better. Because we're hoping to get to a point where we've built all the layouts we need, we've built all the components we need, and really every single request that comes to us is basically, well, you just take these 3 components, you put it in that layout, and you've got your new feature.
Right.
All right, okay. Well, you want that. We just take those 4 components, put in this layout, put that layout in that layout, you've got your new feature. Not a single line of code needed to be written to create all those new things. Right. And every single step we take, we're getting closer to that. And that is our architecture. That's what we're shooting for.
Cool. Awesome. Sweet. I think it's, we're automating the stuff we don't like, right? That brings in human error and do a lot of testing, and I think it's pretty awesome. I think it's solving a lot of problems. So I got 2 places to go. One is bringing this into the front of a project, like you would content strategy, and how is, when you do that now, is that is there any like blowbacks from clients? I mean, there's a client education involved.
There's a huge client education, and that's for sure. And that one of the challenges that we're running into now is that this is still so new. Like for instance, I've been working with Red Hat for like last year, and this is all I've been working on. Right. So the pace that we move with these things is I haven't had a chance to start a new project really like fully with all these ideals. And so we don't have examples. We don't have like, well, this sounds really great, but show me how this is going to work.
Right.
We don't have these examples. In a lot of cases, we work with clients where we just can't show their code. Like, it's behind their lock and key, and they don't want us to show it to anyone else, which totally makes sense. So it's trying to figure out like, we need to sit down and write this out. We need to come up with some kind of like, hey, go here, read this. We're kind of talking about it right now within phase 2 of like, what can we build that will be a good sales tool, that's going to be a good onboarding tool, that's going to explain these processes and explain the value these processes are going to bring. Because that's the main thing. Like people they don't see it. They think they're throwing money at something they don't understand, and it's going to be a waste. And until you can convince them otherwise and get a couple of people to do that, that's when it becomes powerful. It's been great at Red Hat because they're really open about the processes of what we're doing. We're actually putting a submission together to try and do a talk on this, to like a joint talk. So we really want to get out and talk about the things we're accomplishing, the way we're accomplishing them, so that hopefully when we get to new projects, they're like, oh, I heard that one talk. That sounds amazing. I want it. And there's a few killer apps when it comes to this, and I think testing visual regression is one of them, where that's an easy one to sell.
Yeah,
like,
that's
like
awesome.
Automation, documentation, and code is kind of tough to sell because that's a long game, especially with code. Like
it's also subjective too. I feel like you have to get programmers in a room and agree.
Yes.
And so.
And also there's no case studies showing like, well, if I would have built the site this way, I get this result, and if I built the site this way, I would have get this result. It's still subjective. It's our experiences and what we've seen from project to project. But testing, you can show that. Yeah. I did a demonstration of it at PDX SAS a couple weeks ago, and it was like a lot of jaw dropping of like, wow, that's pretty awesome, because you can see here's the old image, here's a new image. You can see they're different, and you can see what's different, and you can test that over and over and over again, and you know with confidence that you're building something that's not constantly being broken by newly introduced code.
Cool.
So yeah, that's it. It's a lot of client education, which is why I talk about this, why I podcast about it, why I write about it, why I really eat and breathe it at the moment, because that's how this is going to get out.
Nice.
That's why I want other people to pick up this banner as well, because these are important things to discuss and decide on at the beginning of projects, and it's not happening right now. There's very few people that are doing this, especially doing it at a regular process.
Cool. All right, and so that explains, like we're talking about, like, and I feel like there would be some investment up front to talk with it. I mean, you still, I'm not sure, like, content strategy, you could still, like, that Band-Aid has to be ripped off. You're going to have to get content somehow. You might as well just rip it off in the beginning. I think, you can't go around that. My other point, my other concern is, like, where do you go now? Like, you talked about putting a talk together with Red Hat. Any other things in the future you're looking at? Are you looking at, you have, like, other people taking up the banner as well, like you have so far?
Yes, I mean, Elise coming on and helping out with this podcast, she is definitely taking it up. I know I've submitted some talks for this upcoming year, hopefully to get out there and talk about it as well. I'm also trying to spend a lot of time talking specifically about a pillar, like going out and talking about testing and talking about code and those types of things. So and always coming back to, this is part of architecture. This is part of decisions that you need to make at the beginning of it. So looking for every opportunity that I can. I mean, again, someone contacted me about doing a conference on it. I'm like, yes, that's exactly it. I mean, there's content strategy conferences now. So there's enough topics in here. There's enough, I think, enough people out there that I have no idea how it will do. I don't know how it's going to go, but it might not be this year or next year. But eventually, I really think this is going to be a thing that's not going anywhere, because we're all gravitating towards coming up with better code standards, coming up with better documentation, with better testing and better processes. Like as we continue to work and struggle, all of us in the industry are coming towards these four things and trying to find a way to do those four things better. Right.
Better and, like, less painful.
Yes, hopefully less painful.
Yeah. So that's awesome. I think definitely I think it's a great goal. I think really want to learn more about it. I was not able to see your talk at TSDevConf because I was running around with my head like a chicken, just trying to get everything done. But so I was producing the event. But yeah, I was so awesome to have you here to talk more about it. Sam, do you have any questions at all? Or?
I think you've answered so many of them. I mean, for me, I'm still nerding out over what we talked about with the documentation. With something like, and maybe this you covered this earlier and I hadn't put it all together yet because this is all blowing my mind. With, like, something like continuous integration and a lot of that part, where does that go in the documentation? Is that a part of the onboarding from, like, start to finish? Here's what you'll be going through, and are you setting up, like, different scenarios, like when stuff breaks, do this?
That's more like the architectural diagrams of talking about how the system works, how code flows from one place into the next, into the next, into the next. And part of it, like, for us, with what we're developing, we basically develop something that just gets ingested by the CMS. So a lot of that process is out of our hands and someone else's. So you document the process, you document the parts that you're part of. Hopefully, if you're able to spread this architecture across the entire site, you're able to get documentation for everything. But document, especially on the front end, document how the front end works, how the front end gets the code gets deployed out. Oftentimes you just save it to the repo and that's how it works. But not always. If you have code that's going out to several different sites, if code gets compiled in a weird way where, like, you've got one code base that you push out to multiple sites and they all compile it with their own sets of variables, like there's a lot of instances where people are doing very creative things with their front end styles for, like, the deployment of those styles. So making sure those are documented, making sure people understand how they can troubleshoot those. or just how to work with them and how to push things out is certainly really important. And important for the client too when they take over the project and they need to figure out how to do it, or they need to pass it on to the next person that comes in to do changes to know how to do it.
Awesome. That's really cool.
Cool. Well, I think we've spent a lot of time talking about awesome stuff. But one question we do ask, I mean, like, I'm afraid that the answer is going to be front-end architecture, so I'm going to just make sure that the answer that's not a possible answer to my next question is what in your workflow, web, what has really grabbed your attention lately in terms of the industry or anything that you really want to, you really are excited about in the future?
And I know you already prefaced this, and I was like, I should probably think of something really good. I can tell you just like the last couple days at least, like what's currently on my mind is I think one thing I want to dive more into is some of the continuous integration tools. There it is. Because I know like Jenkins, I believe it's like a Java app. I mean, it's some pretty hardcore stuff. I think it's relatively accessible for some of the basic things I want to do. But that's an area I really want to get into because I'm a huge fan of workflows. And like really good workflows, and like I press one button and I just did like 15 minutes of workflows. And some of these tools allow you to do those kind of things. I know that me diving into it, learning what they're capable of doing, or just doing it myself in a lot of cases, that's an area I could certainly spend way too much time. I was hoping to dive into it today, and then of course real work got in the way, and I wasn't able to do it. I know, gosh. So I think diving into those tools and kind of taking that automation off of the local environment, and this is kind of the key with CI, is that you take away some of the, like we have a problem, and I don't know if it's like considered a bug in Bootstrap or whatever, but whenever we compile the code with SAS 3.4, so newest version of SAS, it does something weird with something which in itself isn't bad, but when it's combined with a tool that we're using to put our CSS together, something like that, it breaks. Whatever, it chokes on the character, it breaks. So basically, if we push from the wrong machine that has the wrong version of SAS on it, we break our website.
Oh, nice.
And that's not good. So and there's things we can do, like we've got bundlers set up so that we can do like a bundle exec, Compass compile now, and those kind of things. But moving this to something like Jenkins, where you have a single environment, you have a single static, Linux environment that is doing the compiling, is doing the testing. It takes all of that guesswork out of it. So yes, I'm deving on my local, and my local might have its quirks, but when I compile and that gets pushed to the new tag release, when I run tests, when I do all the important stuff that has to work flawlessly every time, something like Jenkins gives you that consistent environment to be able to do that in. We had some issues where one person, when they compiled icon fonts, they looked different. Like the margins were different. We're like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. So being able to move all of that into Jenkins, so you're not like Windows person, Linux person, Mac person, who cares the version of whatever. We know that the final code is going to run through testing and is going to be compiled in a consistent environment. That for me is like, I think that's my next frontier of taking this to like a new level of solidity and completeness.
Cool.
Yeah, so I think I'm excited about that. I talked about it for 5 minutes, so it's usually a good sign.
All right, awesome. Cool. Well, I think that's good point to wrap things up on. Micah, if you could just let people know how they could find you on the web. And
so you can follow me on Twitter at Micah Godbolt. I've got them down in my little avatar thing in the video. Definitely follow SAS Bites as well. Weekly content coming out of there. You can catch all the old shows at youtube.com/SASBites. And if you're looking for someone to speak, I'm still open for speaking engagements, especially remote ones where I don't have to travel. I love talking about this stuff. So if that's something that interests you, I would love to get more involved with it. My goal is to get away from writing as much code and getting more into this side of the architectural and consulting and those kind of things. So any chance I have to do that, I am excited to be part of it. So feel free to reach out, and be happy to talk to you.
Okay, cool. Well, and then Sam, how can people find you on the internet?
SamCap on almost everything, pretty much.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. And then I'm Christopher Schmidt, and you can find me at Telject on Twitter, and you find us at nonbreakingspace.tv. And if you're subscribed to our podcast, you can find us on iTunes there. We'll actually be putting this fresh episode. It's been a year plus some change. So if you subscribe to our feed, you should be and still subscribed. We were really thankful. Sorry.
Yeah, my phone will ding.
Yeah, my phone will ding like, oh, you got a new podcast. All right. All right, cool. And with that, you can also find us on YouTube. This is we're doing a new thing, which is people have been watching us for the last 2 hours or so. Watch us on YouTube. So we're actually this is something that I wanted to do was actually broadcast live for the longest time. And our producer Chris ends, and we just never really got in sync as to do it. And so I'm really glad that as we mentioned earlier in the show, I finally got into a Google Hangout, and I'm like, oh wait, we can do this. Okay, great. It's much easier. So we'll be doing more and more shows on live via YouTube and Google Hangouts, and then putting them into the podcast, the audio version from now on. So with that, I just want to say thanks to Micah for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. And Sam, thanks for being another great co-host.
Thank you.
All right, cool. And we'll be hopefully be around soon. Great. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.